The middle of September 1888, the mood in Whitechapel had shifted from unease to something far more defined. The district still carried its familiar appearance: crowded streets, dim lanterns, the steady movement of night workers, but an undercurrent of tension now threaded through every corner. Conversations in lodging houses turned quieter when strangers entered. Women who once walked alone after dark now lingered beneath gas lamps, waiting for companions before venturing deeper into the alleys. The murders of Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman had not yet reshaped London's understanding of violence, but they had unsettled the East End in a way residents struggled to articulate. Patrol officers noted changes in behavior. Doors were bolted earlier, taverns emptied more slowly, and even habitual wanderers kept to the wider streets. Though no formal announcement had been made, the district behaved as if expecting another incident, one that many feared would arrive without warning. It was within this strained atmosphere, as police attempted to strengthen their patrols and residents adjusted their nightly routines, that the next sequence of events began to unfold. Whitechapel was home to workers, migrants, laborers, and those who moved from lodging house to lodging house in search of temporary shelter. Many of the buildings were subdivided into small rooms or dormitory-style accommodations, often shared by people who were strangers to one another. The persistent shortage of employment, combined with the rising cost of living, resulted in a population that relied heavily on casual work, evening trade, or, in some cases, activities conducted out of necessity rather than choice. Reports from the time described the district as one where survival often depended on day-to-day earnings. Alcohol consumption, particularly in the form of cheap gin, was common in the area. Taverns and public houses remained active through most hours, providing temporary warmth and a brief sense of community for those who entered. Outside these establishments, the streets remained filled with individuals searching for food, work, or shelter as night approached. Police accounts noted that the district was difficult to patrol effectively. The street layout, combined with the number of alleys and courtways, allowed individuals to vanish quickly from view. Officers assigned to the area frequently described it as one of the most challenging beats in London. Among the population most vulnerable to crime were women who sought nightly earnings by walking the streets. Their routes commonly followed the main roads: Commercial Street, Whitechapel Road, Hanbury Street, before branching into smaller passages where lighting was inconsistent. Many of these women lived in lodging houses that required payment in advance, often just a few pence. This led to a routine pattern: earn enough at night to secure a bed, then repeat the process the following evening. Their movements, recorded through witness statements and lodging house logs, provide much of what is known about daily life in the district during this period. By the final days of August 1888, Whitechapel remained in its usual condition of uncertainty. Yet within this familiar atmosphere, a sequence of events was about to unfold. Events that would be examined in detail by officers, coroners, and the press for decades to follow. The first of these occurred on the morning of Friday, the 31st of August, 1888, when residents of Bucks Row, a narrow street lined with warehouses and lodging houses, began their ordinary routines. At approximately 3:40 a.m., a carman walking his usual route observed what he believed to be a woman lying near the gateway of a stable yard. Assuming at first that she was intoxicated, he continued briefly before noticing an unusual stillness in her posture. A second passerby approached, and together they attempted to determine whether the woman was merely unconscious. They soon concluded that the matter required police attention. A constable on patrol arrived minutes later and observed that the woman showed no signs of life. The body was later identified as Mary Ann Polly Nichols, aged 43, a woman known in several lodging houses throughout the district. She had been seen earlier that night attempting to secure money for a bed, and her movements had been traced through witness statements that placed her near Whitechapel Road shortly before 2:30 a.m. The medical examination recorded injuries of a severity that immediately distinguished the incident from other assaults typically seen in the area. The precise nature of the wounds was withheld from the public in official releases, though whispers of their brutality began circulating among residents by the following afternoon. Polly Nichols' death prompted a limited increase in police patrols, though at the time the authorities did not regard the crime as part of a larger pattern. Violent deaths of women in impoverished districts were uncommon, but not unheard of, and investigators initially viewed the incident as isolated. Reports from various newspapers, however, began suggesting that the nature of the attack warranted closer scrutiny. Only 8 days later, in the early hours of Saturday, the 8th of September, 1888, a second event occurred on Hanbury Street. A resident of number 29, upon entering the backyard shortly after sunrise, discovered the body of Annie Chapman, aged 47. Local witnesses recalled seeing her earlier that morning near Spitalfields Market, attempting to earn enough money to pay for lodging. Her last confirmed sighting occurred around 5:30 a.m., in conversation with a man whose description would later be recorded by police. The condition in which Annie Chapman was found bore marked similarities to the earlier case, leading constables on the scene to conclude that the same individual was likely responsible. Disturbances in the yard suggested that the act had been carried out quickly, suggesting a perpetrator familiar with the area's layout and the brief periods of privacy afforded by early morning hours. The coroner's inquest later emphasized that the injuries implied both intent and anatomical awareness, prompting debate among investigators about the skill level of the assailant. The discovery of the second victim intensified public anxiety. Residents of Whitechapel expressed concern regarding the predictability of the locations involved, both near lodging houses, both in areas lacking consistent patrol coverage. Public houses and market stalls buzzed with speculation. The press adopted a tone of urgency, pointing out the short interval between the murders and the similarities observed by officers. For the first time, the notion that a single individual might be targeting women in the East End gained traction, though official statements remained cautious. Police patrol patterns were adjusted yet again, with constables instructed to monitor alleyways and backyards more closely. However, the sheer number of narrow passages rendered complete coverage impossible. Officers frequently referred to the district as a maze, one in which an individual familiar with its routes could move from one location to another with minimal detection. By mid-September, the combination of two murders, their proximity, and their shared details had created an atmosphere of tension across the district. Residents altered their evening routines, and lodging house keepers reported that women were reluctant to walk alone after dark. The newspapers, now competing to report the latest developments, published extensive commentary, often highlighting the difficulty the police faced in navigating Whitechapel's crowded streets. It was within this heightened climate that the next events would take place. Events that would expand the investigation, intensify public alarm, and bring the name Jack the Ripper into widespread circulation. In the final hours of the 29th of September, 1888, the atmosphere across Whitechapel had settled into its usual mixture of restlessness and fatigue. Market stalls along Commercial Road were closing for the night, their wooden shutters drawn down with muted thuds. Gas lamps flickered sporadically, producing uneven light that did little to dispel the haze drifting through the streets. Residents returning to lodging houses moved steadily, but without urgency, accustomed as they were to the district's nocturnal activity. Yet despite the outward appearance of routine, accounts from constables on duty noted an unusual stillness during the early morning hours, a quiet that several later described as anticipatory, though no clear indication existed at the time that anything out of the ordinary was imminent. Shortly before 1 a.m., individuals residing near Berner Street reported seeing modest groups heading to and from a socialist club located along the narrow roadway. The area attracted a mix of laborers, political organizers, and casual visitors, resulting in frequent movement even past midnight. The layout of Berner Street, with its combination of workshops, warehouses, and residential dwellings, created numerous pockets of darkness between the scattered lamps, offering brief stretches where visibility was significantly reduced. It was in one such section that the night's first event would unfold. At approximately 1 a.m., a steward arriving at the yard behind a printing house noticed what he initially believed to be a woman lying in a faint. Only upon closer approach did he recognize the severity of the situation. The woman, later identified as Elizabeth Stride, aged 44, showed no signs of life. Her belongings were minimal, consisting of small personal items consistent with those carried by women who frequented Whitechapel's lodging houses. Witness statements placed her in the vicinity only minutes earlier, some describing her in conversation with an unidentified man. Yet, in contrast to the earlier cases, the injuries noted on her body suggested an interruption, an event not carried to full completion. Police arriving on scene recorded observations indicating that whoever had attacked Stride had done so swiftly before fleeing. Given the nearby foot traffic, investigators considered the possibility that the assailant had been disturbed. Several constables were immediately deployed to search adjoining streets, though their efforts yielded no suspect. The discovery of Stride heightened concerns, but did not prepare authorities for what was to be found less than an hour later. At 1:44 a.m., a carman entering Mitre Square, located in the jurisdiction of the City of London Police, encountered the body of Catherine Eddowes. The square, bordered by warehouses and commercial buildings, was typically deserted during late-night hours, save for occasional patrols. Eddowes, identified as a 46-year-old woman, known at several local lodging houses, had been released from police custody earlier that night after sobering from intoxication. She was last recorded leaving Bishopsgate Police Station shortly before 1 a.m., stating simply that she would return to her lodging once she had the means to pay for her bed. The condition in which Eddowes was found bore clear similarities to the earlier murders, though with greater severity. The precision and rapidity required to inflict such injuries in a public square, one patrolled at 15-minute intervals, astonished investigators. The timing led officials to conclude that the same perpetrator had been responsible for both attacks, committing the second within an exceptionally narrow window. Officers noted that the route connecting Berner Street and Mitre Square could be traversed quickly by an individual familiar with the network of alleyways. By dawn, news of the two murders had begun spreading throughout Whitechapel. Residents described an atmosphere marked not only by shock, but by an increasing sense that the district's geography, its shadows and side streets, offered the assailant precisely the conditions necessary to escape detection. Police presence increased considerably, yet the complexity of the area's layout continued to hinder thorough coverage. Newspapers referred to the events as the double murder, a phrase that would soon evolve into the double event, becoming one of the most frequently cited elements of the case. Throughout the following week, investigators from both the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police exchanged reports, sketches, and witness accounts in an effort to consolidate information. Despite the combined effort, conflicting descriptions and the speed with which the events had occurred limited the progress made. The murders of Stride and Eddowes represented an escalation, one that intensified public anxiety and deepened the mystery surrounding the perpetrator's identity. As the district moved into October, the atmosphere of the East End continued to deteriorate. Women altered their routines further, often choosing to return earlier to lodging houses or avoid poorly lit routes altogether. Residents spoke of a growing belief that the assailant possessed not only anatomical knowledge, but an intimate understanding of Whitechapel's terrain. Yet despite increased patrols, watch groups, and public vigilance, the killer remained unidentified. The events of that night, two murders executed within minutes of one another, stood as a defining moment in the investigation, solidifying the perception that the district was contending with an individual capable of extraordinary boldness, speed, and purpose. By early October 1888, the tension within Whitechapel had reached a degree not previously recorded in local reports. Public houses, ordinarily lively gathering points for laborers and residents, now carried a consistent undercurrent of apprehension. Conversations frequently centered on the murders, with individuals speculating about the killer's appearance, methods, and ability to evade detection. Theories circulated rapidly, many based on fragmented witness accounts or sensationalized articles published in competing newspapers. The sense of uncertainty extended to local authorities as well, with investigators acknowledging the difficulty in distinguishing credible information from rumor. During this period, the press began receiving a series of letters purportedly written by the murderer. Most were dismissed as hoaxes. However, one particular communication, postmarked late September and addressed to the Central News Agency, gained significant attention. The letter employed phrasing that newspapers quickly seized upon, and although its authenticity was debated by officials, it played a notable role in shaping public perception. Its tone suggested a deliberate taunting of authorities, contributing to the belief that the perpetrator was aware of the widespread efforts to apprehend him. Residents discussed the letter at length, often concluding that its publication had intensified the climate of fear throughout the district. Police operations expanded in response to public pressure. Additional officers were stationed near lodging houses, markets, and the known thoroughfares used by women seeking nightly earnings. Patrol reports from this period noted increased civilian presence, with groups forming spontaneously to accompany individuals traveling at night. Despite these measures, the layout of Whitechapel, with its countless intersecting courts, alleys, and service passages, continued to offer ample concealment to anyone intent on avoiding observation. Constables frequently remarked that even heightened vigilance could not compensate for the district's physical structure. Amid these developments, an unusual discovery occurred on the 16th of October. A key piece of clothing connected to the Eddowes case was found near a block of flats in Goulston Street, bearing writing on the wall above it. The message, later removed by authorities to prevent potential unrest, was widely discussed and interpreted in various ways. Investigators considered whether the writing had been left by the murderer or was unrelated, but the ambiguity surrounding it contributed further to the mystery. The item's location, situated between the jurisdictions of two police forces, again highlighted the challenges posed by the geography of the East End. As the month progressed, the strain on investigators grew more apparent. Reports describe officers working extended hours, sifting through hundreds of statements, letters, and alleged sightings. Several individuals were detained for questioning, yet none were conclusively linked to the murders. Theories involving medical practitioners, sailors, laborers, and foreign visitors gained traction in both official and public discussions, but each ultimately lacked sufficient evidence. Meanwhile, the population of Whitechapel continued to operate under the persistent expectation that another event might occur at any moment. The end of October arrived without further incidents, and a brief period of cautious optimism emerged among some residents. Market activity regained a measure of normalcy, and lodging houses reported slightly reduced anxiety among their occupants. However, this reprieve would prove temporary. In the early hours of the 9th of November 1888, within a small room in Miller's Court, a narrow offshoot of Dorset Street, the most extreme case associated with the investigation would be uncovered. The victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was significantly younger than the previous women and had a more stable lodging arrangement, factors that marked a departure from earlier patterns. The scene discovered by authorities was described in official reports as unprecedented in its severity. Kelly's murder not only shocked the district, but also altered the tone of the investigation. The privacy of an indoor location suggested that the assailant had either been invited or had gained access without detection. The attack displayed a degree of time and isolation not available during previous events, raising questions about the perpetrator's evolving methods. Despite these distinctions, the overall nature of the crime aligned closely enough with the earlier cases that investigators concluded it belonged to the same sequence. Following Kelly's death, Whitechapel entered a period marked by heightened caution but gradually diminishing activity from the assailant. No additional murders of similar character were recorded in the subsequent months. The police continued their inquiries, yet without further incidents to guide their efforts, progress slowed. By early 1889, official attention had shifted toward consolidation of evidence rather than active pursuit of new leads. In the years that followed, the events of 1888 remained a subject of ongoing debate among criminologists, historians, and the general public. The combination of the district's environment, the limitations of contemporary investigative methods, and the anonymity afforded by Whitechapel's dense urban structure contributed to the enduring mystery surrounding the case. Testimonies, autopsy reports, and police memoranda continued to be scrutinized, though no definitive conclusion regarding the perpetrator's identity was ever reached. The autumn of 1888 left an indelible mark not only on the East End of London, but on the broader history of criminal investigation. The unsolved nature of the case ensured that the events remained fixed in public memory, serving as a reflection of the era's conditions, its overcrowded streets, its economic hardships, and the vulnerabilities faced by those living within it. For individuals residing in Whitechapel during that period, the murders represented more than a series of crimes. They were a defining element of life in the district, shaping both daily routines and collective consciousness for many years afterward.